You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hello, People Centric leaders. Today, the People Centric Podcast is excited to talk to you about resiliency in your team. You all may have seen online, there's this very famous person. She's putting on these videos where she's interacting with Gen Z employees. And it looks like she always has just strange situations where someone calls. We were telling about a story that one we saw where an employee was driving in his truck and the police were chasing him, it sounds like. And basically she's talking with him and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, the gas card that the company uses didn't work at the gas station. And so I told the person they need to call you, and I drove away." And she says, "That was yours. You should call. What you're doing now is stealing. This is stealing." And they walk through the problem. They walk through the situation. But we hear from lots of people all the time that there's different approaches different generations have to challenges. And sometimes there's complaints about whether it's Gen Z or other groups. And there's a common thing we hear from managers. "Well, I had to figure this out on my own, and so can they. I expect that they can do that too." So resiliency is a topic that applies to all of us. And joining us, not only is me, but also Bethany Taff and Diana Royalty. Bethany, tell us about resiliency.
Well, I'm not going to tell us all about resiliency
I
because
know.
then it would be a short podcast, but I think this is good to talk about because especially we think about it a lot whenever we're thinking. We work with different generations that are in the workforce. We have like 3 generations in the workforce still. And so we see this a lot when we talk about how people grow from failures and how do we help support the next generation coming up and all of these things. And so trying to be, and this is Audrey also who's talking with us too. So if anybody's watching online. Anyways, and so there's a lot for us to say because I think people come at this topic from different angles for sure and may feel really strongly about it. And so I think it'll be good to hear everybody's perspective.
I love that. And Audrey, yes, she is the youngest employee at People Centric. I don't think she is on the W-2 or even contracted yet, but we know it'll happen.
Not yet.
Not yet.
It's on its way.
That is exactly. And Diana Royalty, you were talking even when we were getting into today's topic about the specific person and highlighting how she does this really well, how she's coaching and building resiliency in the middle of these people. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I think resiliency is an interesting topic because people think like you are either resilient or you're not. And I hate that. I hate that it's so dichotomous, right? You either have it or you don't, because I don't think that's necessarily true. And I do think that there's this notion of if you are resilient, you will be successful. If you are not resilient, you're going to fade away and you're going to die. And I think there's some really great middle ground, and there's ways that managers can help build resiliency, and there's ways that people can, raise their hand and say, "I'm not feeling very resilient in this moment and I would like some help with this." And so I think resiliency is buildable, and I think that we're going to talk about that today, and I'm excited about that.
Yes. One of the things that came out to us, there's a recent NBC News article that shares people overestimate their resiliency. But then when they're in the middle of a place of failure, they don't reach out for help. And that's, I think, a part of the problem that we're talking about today. And so there's this one line from the article I thought I'd share. It says, "When people believe that others who have experienced setbacks will grow from their failure on their own, they're less likely motivated to help them in need because they believe those problems will self-correct. Like that person's going to figure it out on their own. I had to sink or swim, so can't they?" That's what I expect from them. So I'm curious, for a manager who has that mentality, what is our advice or input? Because some people go through really hard, challenging things, and it does make them better. But should they expect and anticipate that's a great learning strategy for everyone?
Oh man, here's Diana story time again. I feel like I am a very resilient human being. I feel like I had to spend a lot of time figuring it out on my own. And so when I was a young leader, I did say things like this. I said, like, well, no one told me I had to figure it out. I had to go look it up. I had to ask questions. I had to do this on my own. And they can too. And I said that a lot. Like, they can figure this out too. I'm not going to help them. They can sink or swim. I used those actual phrases in my life. And as I got a little bit older, or maybe softer, or I don't know, more knowledgeable, I don't know what happened. I started to realize that maybe that wasn't the most authentic version of what I wanted my life to look like. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be the person that says, I have all of the knowledge and information, but I'm going to hoard it from you and not share that. Instead, I want to be this person that says, oh my gosh, I have experience with this. Let me share it with you if you want that, right? If you want me to share it with you, I will share it with you. And so instead of saying things like, oh, just figure it out, I said things like, do you want help figuring this out? Can I give you assistance in any of this? Where do you think you're going on it? And I can help give you feedback and guide you. So instead of letting them sink or letting them swim, I just gave them a floaty, right? I didn't like drain the pool for them. I didn't drag them out of the pool. I didn't stop any waves. I just sort of said, let me be there with you and give you a floaty so that you're not drowning. And so I think that was sort of pivotal in my management style. And it took a little bit to change. Bethany Bishop, I'm sorry, you were my guinea pig. I love you. If she's listening. I think there are many times where I was like, well, she can sink or swim. And over time, she kind of helped me see that that's not the best way to do it.
Like somewhere in between. I think that's a really good point. And also I'm thinking to sort of expand on your sort of analogy there is thinking about this. I think when people listen to this too, it's like, what? So I'm just gonna like be somebody's floaty or like give them this floaty all the time because that seems ridiculous too. And it's also like, well, no. It's just like you just do that until they learn to swim. Like you have to keep helping until they're ready to swim. You're not just gonna, throw them in the deep end and then be like, okay, well, if you drown, you drown. Like, no, that's not helpful for anybody. And you should probably feel terrible about that. You do that. And so
letting someone drown, you should feel bad about that.
Really bad about that. And so
I think
if
we
you
should
think
add
about
that.
it that way,
We can add that to our, employee handbook, because I don't think it's explicitly in there, but that is not appropriate word.
Not appropriate. But it's the thinking of, okay, so no, I'm gonna put the floaty out there right now. I'm gonna help a little bit, but we're gonna keep working on this until they can swim, because I shouldn't have to give them the floaty forever. That's not the goal here at all. And so I think that's a really helpful story to share, Diana. Definitely.
And I'm curious, just because you gave the example, Diana, like especially earlier on when you're practicing this with Bethany Bishop, do you have any examples when she started to come to you and say, hey, like maybe I need a different floaty, or kind of helped give you feedback as a leader too, as you were growing in your ability to help and coach her?
Yeah, Bethany Bishop is the absolute goat at managing up. I'm going to say that now. She's like the best at it. And she did a great job of managing me. She would come to me and be like, hey, I know you gave me this thing and you told me these 3 things, but now I've run into this, this, and this. And I was just curious if you have any advice on where to go next. Right. And she literally would just say, what can you give me? And she did it. She did it in just like the best way. She would come to me and be like, you're so wise. You're so wonderful. Help me now. Instead of like, hey, you jerk, you didn't give me enough information, which honestly is what happened, right? I was honestly just like not giving her enough information to go do the task and expected her to just figure it out. And really, all I had to do was say, here's what I know. Here's some background. Here's where I think you should go. But the end result is this, go after it. And I wasn't even giving her that much. I was just like, go do this thing. And so she was very good about saying, can I have some context? Can I have the goals? Can I have some advice on where you think we should go with it? Can I have some advice on what you did when you tackled this? And so she just asked really great questions to get me to give her the information that was useful to her. I also think she did a good job of doing enough. So it was not just her relying on me the whole time, right? She was trying to learn how to swim. She was doing the movements. She was doing all the things she needed to do. And then coming to me and be like, I'm still struggling on these parts. And so it was good because I could look at it and say, oh, you really are trying. She knew if she had just come to me and did nothing, that I was going to be like, go try to figure it out, you know? And so she was doing enough on her own as well. And I thought that was really smart of her to come to me after she had done a few things and looked into a few things and had specific questions.
I love how that story is an example of, kind of that relationship building you created together, especially as you manage that relationship. Because I think that's an important part of learning, both your own strengths and skills, and then how do I come to my leader or to this team member and better support them as they're learning to sink or swim, and like more feedback behind that. And Bethany, your point of like, okay, you start with a floaty, but then hopefully, I mean, the intention is that you grow and that you keep building and that you keep developing. I know a lot of leaders we talk with have a lot of questions about delegation specifically. And anytime we do a training and ask a group of people, how many of you feel like you're an amazing delegator? Very rarely do hands raise. And so the follow-up question usually is, have you ever experienced a great delegator? Which I think is another way to say it, like a great leader, because great leaders delegate. And very few people also raise their hands. But when they do, it's someone that made a huge difference for them. So I think, Diana, what you're talking about also is just an example of good delegation as well, kind of up and down and how to manage that. Would you add anything else, like any other key tactics or good ways to approach delegation when it's not just one person, but even building resiliency in a team?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit I'm not the best at delegating because I am a weird control freak and we're a small team and so I'm just not the best at it. But I do think that Bethany was very good at saying, "Hey, what's on your plate today and what can I take?" Or you do this thing that I really want to know how to do. And so then she was like, "Show me how to do it." And so I don't know. I think it was a little bit of back and forth. Like I would say, "Hey, I want you to do this thing." And she would say, "Great, I will do that. Tell me how." Or she would see that I was doing something that she was like, "I think I can do that. Like, you're doing it, but I think I can do that. And you just need to give it to me." And she was also um, very good at knowing her own strengths. And so she always said, I know that I'm going to be good at this part, but you're going to have to help me with this part. And so she knew what she was best at. And I think leaning into some of those strengths and recognizing those and pulling them out for me and repeating them, I'm good at this, not so much at this, was just a really useful tactic for both of us. Because then she would even say, Diana, you're good at this, but I think I'm better at this. You should give this to me. Right. And so it really was knowing each other and navigating those strengths to help each other do the best job. And when you delegate, it is easy to delegate to someone that you know they're going to be successful at it. And so you do have to know their strengths. If I delegated stuff to her all the time that was like her absolute weakness, it would feel like failure.
Yeah, I think that's really good. There's things there I think about to add to this question that you asked, Philip, is whenever you're delegating, I think I think there is something to a little bit of the struggle in it too. Like, I think it's like measured risks, right? Of like, so if you're a leader and you're delegating something that you're like, I'm not entirely sure how well this person's going to do at it, but here's why I'm going to give this to them because I see this strength, and this strength. Or more practically, even somebody has to do it because I'm not going to be here forever. So I need somebody else to know how to do this. And so I think just being like, okay, so there might be a little bit of struggle that you let people have within that, but I think the mistake is when we don't follow up to help talk about what the failures might be or like how to kind of course correct a little bit. It's that coaching aspect that I think people miss. So we're not saying like just shield your team from any kind of failure preemptively. We're saying like make sure that you're like helping support them along the way if you can. If they're going down completely the wrong direction, like you might want to say something. Or you know what I mean? I think there's just a little bit of like, okay, like let them go the direction that they're trying to go. But then if you see it's like way off course, like let's talk about it and say like, hey, like how did we get all the way over here? What is your thought process on this? Or hey, like what questions do you have about this as we go along? So I think that's it. Like I was thinking about this is funny. I was thinking about the verse. We are not a spiritual podcast, but I was thinking about the Bible verse that talks about suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character. And then the last part is character produces hope. But I think about that and I was like, there is something to that, right? Like we do like a little bit of that suffering and like trying to figure it out does produce perseverance that produces that character. And so I do think we need some of that. We're not saying like cut that out completely. We're just saying like you can do that in a really good way that helps support somebody in the process. And something that I see with this, I've seen with this in like coaching scenarios, especially as we're looking at boomers who are retiring and thinking about like, okay, somebody on the team has to do this stuff. Why aren't they doing these things? And it's like, well, you haven't effectively helped them learn how to do it. And I know that you've learned from experience, but like you don't have time. We don't have time to just let people like drown and flail through it. It's like if you want this business to be successful and you care about the success of the organization that you're in, even if you're not there, like you're doing a lot of people a favor by leaning in and helping support people in the process of just learning the things that you know and they don't yet.
That's a great example. You know, Don and I were talking recently, our own Don Harkey, our founder, our CEO, about our first jobs and the differences. And Don's very early on, one of his was working at a basically topography organization, a company that had engineers that looked at topography and split land and did all kinds of work. And his job was to go and actually pull out books from rooms and print out and cut pieces of paper onto maps and then scan them into a machine. And you had to do all of this work, put all this together, and there's very fancy machine was very expensive to print colored copies. And if it was off by within like a quarter of an inch, you'd get in trouble.
How old is Don? Was this like 1954?
Exactly.
What is
Yeah.
happening?
Lewis and Clark just explored the eastern state. They were paving the way, and that's why Don thought Diana should move to Seattle because I hear the pioneers say it could be a great place, right?
Oh
Like
my God.
this is a long thing. And so he said, you know, and so the punchline of the story is he's like, so that's why in Word, when you copy and paste, it's using these terminologies because that's literally what in an office setting you would literally cut, copy, and paste. That's why, you know, there's a little scissor emoji and why all of our electronic things still have what looked like folders, all these things. So what our emphasis of talking about that one was, I think Don is very good at finding patterns and themes. And that's something that came from his work even back then. I think a part of it is just a natural gift. And for a very long time to do that job well and others, like he had to pay attention to detail and consider the bigger picture and be really creative in how he handled it. But also in that situation, no one really told him how to do this or how to look up the history of lots of land or other things. Like there's a lot of components in it that just kind of made him better. However, some of that's kind of obsolete now too, and I think that's a part of the challenge that Bethany, to your point, someone who's highly experienced learned on incredibly different tools than other people did as well. So not to say that new people can't learn, but I think the updates in technology and just ways to learn, that's another challenge with this also. You had the benefit, I think, of in some ways slower growth, whereas new people now have a lot of challenges in like how to put the tech together or how does it supply? And so you're having to learn from a fire hose at a much faster pace. We talk about the storm, the perfect storm that's coming as well, as a lot of boomers and Gen Xers leave the workforce. It's creating not only that gap in knowledge, but just a leadership gap. And I think that impacts everyone at the front lines too, because that means there's less time and attention to train them, which also adds, I think, to why resiliency is such an important trait.
Yeah, and I think about resiliency, and something we had talked about before we joined the podcast was that when you think about resiliency, you think about people who are gonna finally pass a drug test, right? Someday something's gonna happen and they're no longer gonna be addicted to drugs, or that, you know, you can talk about diet and exercise for so long and eventually they're going to get the right exercise routine and eat the right diet. And the truth is those things don't just happen. Those things don't just happen. If you don't pass a test 10 times, the likelihood of you passing it the 11th time is just not likely, right? It doesn't happen like that. It takes some help and some intervention and some assistance to get people to do those things. Back in the day when we had to take the ACT, is that still a thing? Do people still do that?
It's
That's a
still
thing. Okay.
It's a
I
thing.
don't know. I'm old. I don't know. I took the ACT and I was trying very hard to get, I think it was a 30, because then you got like some scholarship. I don't remember. I was trying really, really hard to do it. And I took that stupid test 3 times and got the same score. I got a 29 3 times. And I could not get to the 30. But you know what I never did? I never got help. And so I never got the 30. I did not get a free ride to college. I had to pay for that on my own because I never sought the help to go get it done. And I think back to that moment all the time where if I had just said, resiliency isn't getting me through this, I can keep doing the same thing over and over, but I'm not going to change the outcome. And I think back to so many times where I'm like, why didn't somebody offer to help me? And why didn't I ask for help? Because then I could have gotten it, right? I could have gotten there. Just one more point. And so I think that's an interesting concept of like, yeah, you expect people to just be resilient, but also that's a ridiculous expectation. You need to offer help and assistance to get people there.
Yeah, I love that resiliency isn't just settling with the way things are and just trudging through things the way they are forever, right? Like resiliency, that's a great example is if you will come across things that produce suffering or that are unpleasant or that are hard and we don't have a solution. But I think it's how do we creatively work through that and then pull others in to do that. As you were saying that, I had just this, silly mental picture of Wile E. Coyote. He's always chasing the Roadrunner in these old Looney Tune cartoons. And I always have observed that Wiley is very close so many times, but he always orders a different Acme rocket or a different Acme trampoline, or like he never tries the same thing and improves it. It's like a totally different plan, right? His goal is the same, catch the Roadrunner. But if he just made a few adjustments, he probably could have gotten it after 3 or 4 tries, right? Instead of just a totally new plan every time. And so I think that's a piece of this idea of resiliency too. Like you can learn and grow and keep adapting in the middle of it. How do you, and we've spoke to this a little bit already, but I feel like there's a fine line between seeing someone struggling and jumping in and fixing it for them, right? Versus watching some of this natural growth that comes from struggle and helping someone just develop that on their own. What's helpful advice to keep someone from jumping in too soon?
Man, I don't know yet. I'm I'm the one that's like, don't let them fail. Oh, failure's hard. Like, don't let it happen. And I can prevent this before it goes down in flames. And I should have done this myself. That's me, right? But I do think that starting with a question is always the right answer, right? Like going in and just being like, hey, did you want help with this? Hey, how's that thing going? I think is always good, right? And and I also think that if you see someone struggling, it's okay to point that out. It's okay to say, I've really noticed that you're struggling with this thing. Is there something I can do to help you or are you good? And I think people are usually honest, like, no, I'm going to struggle through this. I got it, but I'm going to struggle through this. Or, oh my God, thank you. I would really like some help. I know there are times in my life where I'm like, no, I'm going to struggle through this, but I'm going to get it. The thing that comes to mind, my husband and I play a lot of board games, and there's this one game called, I don't remember what it's called, Mission to Mars or something like that. Terraforming Mars, that's what it's called. And this dude beat me so many times. And every time he beat me, I was like, again, we have to do it again. And he was like, do you want me to just share like my strategy in the game and what I'm thinking? I'm like, absolutely not. Don't share that with me. I'm going to get through this. I have to win, but I have to win on my own and I'm going to figure this out and I will get it. And now I beat him. So I figured it out. We're more evenly matched. The last 4 matches I've won, but whatever. So now, but it did take the struggle to figure it out, right? It was like, I need to live through this. I need to do it on my own. Like, please don't tell me. But now I do it. And then there are other times where I would have said, yes, absolutely. Tell me what you're thinking so that I can get through this faster, right? Or I can figure this out better. But I think you as a person know what you need. And so sometimes it's okay to say, no, I'm going to struggle through this on my own. Just give me a minute. But I think the leader asking the question, like, do you want me to just tell you or help you, or are you okay with this? And then let them decide if they need the help or not.
That's great advice. I think also for the leader, considering, even you may not share this, although I think sharing an amount of this is helpful, with your team or the person that you see some struggle with or as they're growing, building that strategy to, win Mars. But with that, it's thinking for yourself, what are the limits? Like, what's an acceptable amount of wrong or mistake in this project, right? Because if no mistake is allowed, well, then that's a really high bar and that doesn't allow for growth. And you probably didn't develop yourself that way. But if you know, okay, there's certain levels that failure or mistakes are allowed, great. And then what are the thou shalts? What must happen and is not negotiable that we need to get to? And then help your team really see that and know that. But then after that, let them have the freedom and autonomy to work on it and be creative and try that strategy.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's what I was thinking too. Philip, is just the piece of, I think sometimes maybe leaders jump in too quickly because not because that person's even failing, they're just maybe doing it differently than you would do it. And so knowing the difference of like, is it wrong or is it just different? And are they actually struggling, or do I just not like how they're doing it and I want to control it? And so I think like for the leader, knowing the difference between that and I think then it's just like this article that we referenced, like it talks about just the like people don't easily make those connections towards failure, and they just need somebody to help be a thought partner. Essentially, is like we talked about being kind of that coaching role, but it's just somebody who's going to ask the questions and help them think through how something didn't work. So maybe they know, hey, I didn't like how this went, but I haven't stopped to really process what it was that didn't go well or what could have been better or things like that. And it's literally just like they need you as a leader to sit with them and kind of like just talk it out. They're probably going to come to the same realizations that you quickly see, but they just need somebody. But you probably didn't come to those reasonings overnight either for yourself. And so just helping them analyze and process that. It's not always just telling them what it is. So
I think a lot of the feedback we hear from some managers is, it's about people like this. If they don't know, or Bethany, you gave that example of, a very experienced, seasoned boomer who's like, these young people, they don't know, and I expect or wish that they knew more. I think the next step question is like, okay, well, if they don't know, and this is the team you have, then what are you going to do to help them know? It's as simple as that, because saying my way was different and I grew up a different way, it's like, yes, that's great then. And good job that you're here. So then how do you share that? How do you get that out there and share that? And I wonder if sometimes it's an overwhelming question, because I think a lot of people maybe don't look back and consider how they also were developed. They just know where they are. And there's not maybe a strategic or systematic way that got them there, which again is all a part of the challenge at times. So I know we've talked about a lot of useful tips and tricks here. Is there any other final takeaway or addition you guys would add?
I think the only other thing I want to mention is that a lot of us older people, I'm going to put myself in that category, believe that we never had any help. Like, I will absolutely say, like, no one told me how to do it. I had to go figure it out. But the truth is, I probably did have more help than I realized. And like my own brain is clouding the recollection of how that actually happened, right? I think we all do that, and we all omit factors or don't think about the things that actually did help us. And so I think a lot of the, I don't know, rhetoric on resiliency of like, well, no one helped me is pretty inaccurate. Somebody probably did help you and you just don't remember. So maybe if you can be the person that helps someone, maybe they'll forget about you too. And that's okay.
I think that's good. I'm also thinking back to your example. So when you're talking about Bethany Bishop and her ability to manage up, I think from the employee's perspective too, something to think about is to be okay a little bit with the discomfort that comes along with building resiliency, because it does produce perseverance and character and all of those things. So be okay with that, but also don't wallow in it. So if you feel like you're failing or you're making mistakes, don't just be like, oh, I'm the worst, I'm the worst. And I'm speaking to myself in here. Like, I have these tendencies of like, okay, that didn't go really well, dang it, and just sort of sitting there. But it's like, ask somebody to support you in processing through those things and saying like, okay, what did you see that I could have done differently? Or can you help me just like think through how I approached this thing or that thing, and just ask me some good questions? Or do you mind if I just kind of talk through how this went? And I think it's just like, don't be afraid to reach out and ask for more support in that, so that you can get to where you want to be. So you don't feel like, oh, do I have to make the same mistake over and over again until it's better. Ask for the support that you need, and don't be afraid of that discomfort. It doesn't mean that you are a failure. I mean, that thing didn't go well that time, but that doesn't mean that you are a failure entirely as a person.
That's awesome. I love that. I think that's one thing our team does that I almost most enjoy about being a part of our team, and then what we do with others, with clients too, is that idea of normalizing help. And I think that's a part of what being a team is. It's not just I'm amazing on my own, and when a project is done, we vet it by the team, but it's doing this actual real work as a team. And Bethany, your example is so good of just like, I don't know if this went well, or if I didn't do well, like what do we do next? And it doesn't necessarily define the crux of everything. One of our teams we work with a lot of people in healthcare. We work with people in other industries too. And one thing I've seen is that people who aren't in healthcare sometimes will use the phrase, right? It's not rocket surgery or it's not brain surgery, which can sometimes, I think, minimize the stakes, because all work is important. And that's why it's meaningful. You're not spending all this time doing something unimportant. But of course, our people in healthcare would say, well, actually, we do brain surgery, so it is that important. And we've not worked with rocket scientists yet, though I'm sure one will come up soon. So with that, our challenge, I guess, and encouragement for everyone is Diana and Bethany Bishop's example is, I think, just a really simple story to attach to of, hey, this is something you're really good at. Also, how can I help you, from the leader? And for the employee up, like Bethany shared, just consider what that might look like. Be uncomfortable a little more comfortably, and let that rise to the occasion. But if you feel lonely and lost, ask for help. That's okay. Resiliency will come and follow. We appreciate all of our listeners. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Lead well and be well.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead